your life.
Cast your mind back to this time last year, before any of this happened. What was the most obvious thing that showed that you were a Christian? What was it about you that meant that your family, your friends, your neighbours knew that you were a Christian, one of God's people? What was the most important thing you did as a Christian? Well, I think that most of us would agree that it was this. At 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, you weren't sitting in your armchair at home, you were in church. But what's the big thing we can't do at the moment? Go to church. So what shows the world that we're Christians now, in April 2020, in the middle of this coronavirus pandemic? Is it that we're sat in front of our TVs or computers on Sunday morning? Well, I'm sure that's not all that distinctive. I expect many of your neighbours are doing the same. I mean, I hope these services are useful, and I'll show you in a minute why I think in a way they're vital. But it's hardly very distinctive to be in your sitting room in front of the TV at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, is it? So here's the challenge. If we can't do what used to be at the very centre of our Christian life, what do we do to live out our faith? How do we live out our faith when the thing that used to be at the centre of it, the thing that used to be most noticeable, is taken away? And that's what I want to think about this week, and over the next few weeks we're going to continue looking at this passage and unpacking it. What are the things that show we're Christians? How do we live a Christian life when we can't go to church? And to do that, I've taken us back to one of my favourite passages in the Bible, the one that Deb read for us in Acts chapter 2. And I'd just like to read it for you again now. This is set, as many of you will know, very, very early in the life of the early church. We just had all that happened at Pentecost when God poured out his Holy Spirit. 3,000 people accepted Jesus. They were baptised and they became part of a new community. And then this describes how this new community lived, how these people lived their lives. I'll read. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together, had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts, and they broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favour of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. And the reason I think this is so helpful is that in just a few verses it paints a picture of what it meant to be a Christian long before they ever had churches. So I think today we can read it with new eyes as our church buildings are closed to us, because this pandemic has taken us back to a situation much more like that of the early church. And I think that if we take to heart what we see here, we may even look back and be very grateful to God for this time. Because my prayer is that as church services, the thing we used to be satisfied with as a centre of our Christian life, are taken away from us, we'll see how instead we need to put our roots down deeper and discover, maybe some of us rediscover who've had a taste at some point in the past, maybe have a taste even today, rediscover a Christian life that is so much richer than anything we had before. There's a song we sing sometimes, isn't there? When the music fades and all is stripped away. I don't know if you know the story, but that emerged from a church that used to be known for a great worship band with great PA system, visual effects. And they decided that although they were doing all this, there was something missing. And so they told the worship band they could have a few weeks off. In fact, they could be off for as long as it took to rediscover what worship was really all about. so that people could no longer come to church and just sing along to somebody else worshipping. But they had to discover, each person had to discover what worship there was in their own heart. And for Matt Redman, who was the worship leader, now sitting just in the congregation alongside everybody else, it led him to rediscover the heart of worship. And many of us have been blessed by the song that emerged from that. So my prayer is that for us, as normal churches are stripped away, God will take us back to the heart of what it means to be disciples of Jesus. God does that sometimes, you see. He strips away the things that we become dependent on, the things we become satisfied with, so that we can experience him in a new way. He did it with the man Job in the Old Testament. And at the end of Job's story, after 42 chapters, it's a really long book, 42 chapters of anguished wrestling with God, arguing with his friends. The end of his story is better than the start. Now, we don't know how long this crisis is going to last, how many chapters it will take to write the story of this time. But it's my prayer, it's my longing, that just as it was for Job, the end of our story, for us as a church, for the followers of Jesus in this community, will be, as it was for Job, so much better than the beginning. So let's take a look at our little passage, the life of this very, very early young church, inexperienced church. What I want to offer to you is that very simply, what it shows is that for these people, being a Christian wasn't centred on church, but instead it transformed every area of their lives. Sometimes talked about as whole life discipleship. But in these times of having to live out in our homes, I'd like to call it every room discipleship. Let me show you what I mean. We start here in the sitting room because it says that they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. And you might think that that means listening to a sermon in church for us. And I certainly hope that our teaching at St Albans is faithful to what the apostles taught. But being devoted to the apostles' teaching is far more than that. And right now, your sitting room is probably the place where you watch Sunday services anyway. But as I said, being devoted to the apostles' teaching doesn't just mean listening to a sermon for 20 minutes. I mean, imagine if my marriage proposal to Helen had been, I'm utterly devoted to you. And here's my offer. I'm going to spend an hour with you each week, with no more than 20 minutes of that listening to what you say. Wouldn't be much devotion, would it? Being devoted to the apostles' teaching means really getting to grips with their message, the message of the whole Bible. And the sitting room, of course, is also the place where you sit and read, where you watch TV, other videos, where you chat to other people in your household. So I hope that you've got a Bible easily to hand in your sitting room. Maybe a notebook too, to jot down the thoughts that you have and questions as you read. Maybe another good Christian book. If we're going to be stuck at home for a while, do you really want to look back on this time as a time when you binged on TV repeats and old sports matches? And if you're not a reader, if books really aren't your thing, there is lots of good stuff on the internet. If you didn't do it, or even if you did, the Bible course has got masses of really good material and it's very, very watchable. During the crisis, they made the whole thing available online. We've put the link to it in this week's notice sheet. And if you can't get to the internet and would like to watch the Bible course, do let me know. We'll get a DVD to you. And the other thing I'd really encourage you to watch, if you can, is the material from this year's Spring Harvest. They haven't been able to have the big gathering down in Minehead, but they put most of the teaching they were going to have and worship and other things online. And some really, really good material there. I think almost prophetic material about what it means to be unleashed, to be church in these strange circumstances. We're actually going to be spending the next couple of Tuesday evenings thinking about that. I'll explain more about that later. But one thing, if you are going online, please be selective. just because it claims to be Christian doesn't mean it's faithful to the Apostles' teaching. We'll talk more about that next week. But it's not just the sitting room. It's the kitchen too, or wherever you eat. The early church met in each other's homes and shared meals regularly too. At the moment, of course, we can't do that. But let's look forward to the time when we can. And even when you're eating alone or with others in your house, there's stuff for you here. Do you eat, as the passage says, with glad and sincere hearts? Is praising God part of what happens at your meals? When you break bread, whether it's like this or like this, do you take time to remember that Jesus' body was broken for you? And it's not just eating together that every room disciples do in the kitchen. The passage talks about fellowship, which is about developing close relationships, about working together, planning together, doing life together. Some of the best times I've had of fellowship have been over the washing up. On Wednesday evenings at Brickworks after our meal and meet. Formally, things finished at around 9, but as other people started to drift away, Andy and I would go to the kitchen. We'd do the washing up together. And there were some of the best conversations I had with him. It was the same on Sunday afternoon, after all our planned activities had taken place. There would still be 3, 4, 5 people in the kitchen, sometimes the odd crying child, talking about life, talking about the things of the week, talking about how they were going to live life in the light of who God is and who they are in God. People looking at phones, people looking at the Bible. It was just a wonderful sense of being together, of making sense of life, God's way. And the place we need to be to experience fellowship these days, or seem to need to be, is right here in front of our computer screens as we do our Zoom conferences, as we chat on WhatsApp. And it's got its pluses, hasn't it? I'm quite excited about the new friendships that are emerging as we talk on the phone, we talk in different ways. I'm getting to know people I didn't know very well before. I know Helen is too, and I'm sure many of you are as well. I wasn't quite sure what room to use for this, but every room discipleship, whole life discipleship, has to affect our money. The disciples in Acts, it says, had their possessions in common. They sold things they had and gave the money to those who had need. We'll explore this much more in a future sermon, probably in a couple of weeks. But I think it's worth saying that I don't think this is in any sense a sort of organised commune, a kind of first century kibbutz. It's more an attitude of mind that recognises that all we have, both money and things, belongs to the Lord and is to be used for his service. That money and possessions aren't about gaining control, so this is mine, but showering blessing. Do you need it? It said that the last part of a man to be converted is his wallet, and I imagine the equivalent for a woman is a purse or handbag. When we sing, "Take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee," is there an asterisk and an exception clause that says, well, except for financial things? The church in Acts didn't have one. In fact, it changed their view of their entire home. Instead of being a place of retreat, a place just for family, their homes became places of welcome, places of fellowship. In fact, they were as familiar with each other's homes as they were with their own. Now, of course, with the current restrictions, that will have to wait. I think one of the most difficult things about them is that it stopped us making our homes those places of welcome. They've become places of isolations. An Englishman's home is his castle, and they've become castles, haven't they? But I think even in our isolation in our own homes, as we stay behind those front doors, it can become part of discipleship if we realise that we're doing it not to protect ourselves, but to protect others. Even then, self-isolation can be part of our discipleship. So I'm ending my tour here in front of the clock, that thing that normally orders so much of our lives. These new Christians, on the contrary, organise their whole lives, their whole days, around their faith. Every day in the temple, every day meeting together in each other's homes for fellowship meal, time to study the Apostles' teaching, time to pray. And one of the interesting things, I think one of the opportunities about the present situation is that much of our normal routine has gone. I was reading today that the electricity companies are saying that home electricity use is starting much later. People are getting up later. They haven't got that same pattern to their day. Everything has changed. It's almost like in the past, I think our lives were so busy and so entangled together and intertwined that it was really hard to squeeze Christianity into them. But these restrictions have swept everything away and allowed us to start again with a clean sheet. And with going to church gone as well, we've got an opportunity to reshape our whole lives around being disciples of Jesus, devoted to the Apostles' teaching, the fellowship, the breaking of bread and prayer. And of course that includes not only the public places I've shown in this video, but also the private, secret ones, the places and times when we're alone with our own thoughts. This is maybe the most challenging of all at these times, as the isolation messes with our minds. We'll come back to that again in the weeks ahead. Just as I was listening to that, I was aware that I'm not given enough attention to the fact that a number of you still are able to work and are needed to work. You're doing vital work in the health service and other parts of the life of the country. Obviously for you don't have quite the same space that others do. But I think even there, a number of things have been taken away, haven't there? There's a lot of things we would normally be doing that we can't do. Certainly church has been taken away. And I think for all of us, we need to do this reshaping of our lives. Let the things were dependent on be stripped away and rediscover what it really means to be a disciple of Jesus. But as I finish, I'd like to just touch on the question of why. Why was it that these Christians, these people who'd only been Christians, they didn't even call themselves Christians, I guess they were disciples at that stage, disciples of Jesus. They decided to follow Jesus even though he was dead, or had been killed, I should say, shouldn't I? Why did they suddenly completely change the whole orientation, the whole pattern of their lives? Why did they let Jesus into every room of their lives? Well, very simply, it's grace. These believers were utterly convinced, utterly amazed, that God should welcome them when they had done so much to his Son. They were astonished that God should pour out his Spirit on a bunch of people who a few weeks earlier had been shouting for his own Son to be crucified. And in that amazement, they realised that God was so different from how they'd seen him before. That he truly was the loving Father we all long to have. Not a man on the cloud in the sky with a whole set of rules and a rule book, but a Father who opens his arms wide and runs out to meet us as we come back to him. And so they knew that their old life of law-keeping, of trying to impress people, trying to impress themselves, trying to impress God, was gone. That God's grace was completely outrageous, but offered to them. Let's reflect on that as we listen to another of the songs that Terry's friends in Anam Karas have recorded for us. The words will be up on the screen if you want to listen to them.
There's a lot of pain, but a lot more healing. There's a lot of trouble, peace. There's a lot of hate, but a lot more loving. There's a lot of sin, but a lot more grace. Oh, outrageous grace. Oh, outrageous grace. Love unfurled by heaven's hand. Oh, outrageous grace. Oh, outrageous grace. Through my Jesus, I can stand. There's a lot of fear, but a lot more freedom. There's a lot of darkness, but a lot more light. There's a lot of cloud, but a lot more vision. There's a lot of perishing, but a lot more light. Oh, outrageous grace. Oh, outrageous grace. Love unfurled by heaven's hand. Outrageous grace. Oh, outrageous grace. Through my Jesus, I can stand. There's an enemy that seeks to kill what it can control. It twists and turns, makes mountains out of molehills.